Hey guys, Wormeck here. I'm going to bring you another video from Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. A couple people have messaged me asking for footage of a dungeon, so that's what we're going to do here. So we'll be going into Copperbell Mines. Now, in this instance, I will be scaled down so I won't have access to all of my abilities, but this will still give you a general idea of the way the dungeons are kind of laid out, how they kind of work, the type of stuff you can expect to see. So they do all have a little cutscene like this at the beginning, kind of showing it off a bit. Alright, so this is our group for today. Now, I'm going to be kind of going over, as we're going through here, explaining kind of what I'm doing, to give you an idea of how the White Mage kind of plays. In this case, I'm playing more as a Conjurer, since I don't have access to any of my White Mage skills, as I'm too low level here. So, you saw me just cast Protect, which, as a Conjurer, actually reduces physical and magical damage. On the left side here, you got the different party lineups. Green is for healers, and the blue is our tank. Now, a lot of times there will be CC done, because this game actually does require CC in some cases. It's not mandatory, but I'll be honest, it makes things a lot easier. Normally I handle CC as the Conjurer / White Mage, but at this level I don't have my CC yet, so it would normally be on a Black Mage at this point. Or not Black Mage, Stomp Mage. Sorry, the class switching level syncing business kind of confuses me sometimes. Now, the healing in this game is a little bit different than some games. This one actually encourages healers to kind of a bit more spam their heals. You see, this guy's pretty regularly taking damage. I can heal him a decent amount. It's not like my heals don't heal much, but he will quickly regain and lose HP throughout the fight. And the mechanics of the Conjurer / White Mage do actually encourage you to spam your weak heal, because as I spam my weak heal, I can occasionally, and you're not at this level, but I can occasionally get a proc that gives me a 0 MP casting of Cure 2, which heals for a bit under twice as much, but for twice the mana. So it's not great to use that on a regular basis. You go out of mana pretty quick. And as a White Mage, you actually don't have any way of getting your mana back, at least so far that I've seen. That might change later on. So it's a little bit important to conserve your mana. You don't want to go blowing it all instantly on every single fight. Now, bad White Mages would never attack. You should generally be doing something, especially at least on trash. During bosses you probably want to save your mana, of course. But in this case you can afford to let loose with attacks every so often here, so things like Arrow, casting Stone 1. I don't have Stone 2 at this point, but Stone 2 would be the better option for DPS. Obviously, don't be the fail healer that is so busy on DPS that you let your tank die. That is kind of a bad idea. At this level, I'm also too low to be able to resurrect in battle, but that is a thing that I do. That's something that Conjurers get later on. It's a trait, so you've got the passive traits as well as the active skills. And that is a very useful trait, so most other classes, even though you can cross-class to get raise, you can't actually cast it in combat. So that's kind of how they've limited that to only the healers being able to resurrect in fights. Generally a good idea too, if you are a DPS class or something, if you can, cross-classing in raise is always cool if ever your healer dies, that they don't have to run all the way back. Go away. So I just used Fluid Aura. That is a skill that knocks an enemy back 15 yalms with guards, let's be honest. And it does a bunch of damage. It also binds them in place, so it roots them after you knock them back. So it's really useful for if something gets on top of me. Generally, you don't want to be that guy that runs in and uses it all the time, because it will knock the enemy away from your tanks and melee DPS if you happen to have any. So it's a pretty large dungeon. Right now we're just kind of clearing out Sprigarns here. Now you probably noticed, you might have seen it actually just before this fight, but the enemies actually had a yellow line going between them. That actually lets you know that those enemies are linked, so when you attack one, you will pull the whole pack. It's kind of nice, I really appreciate that they included that. It kind of takes the guesswork out of, like, is this a 2-pack fight, is this going to be a solo pull, can you solo pull it even? There's not really much proximity aggro unless you actually physically body pull, of course, by running up to it. But you can very easily at a glance tell what is going to be coming with you when you pull at range. So since last time that we were recording, things have changed a little bit for me. I've got a little bit higher, unlocked some new stuff. Got myself a unicorn mount, which is cool. I've also got my Chocobo's companion. I don't think I showed that off last time. I don't think I had it unlocked yet. But you can use Geishel greens after a certain point in the story quests to summon your Chocobo buddy to help fight with you. It basically forms a party. You can use it in parties as well, up to having 4 people in the group. So you can use that to kind of fill in extra slots that are missing kind of thing, or if you're dueling with a friend, you can use it to essentially have 4 people. So each of these instances has their own little story. Most of them you do on the actual main story quests. So this is actually an instance that every player must go through at some point to advance their story. And this one's largely about the Hecatoncheer, which is these big giant stone golem kind of guys breaking out of their prison. They've been buried underground for a really long time, and people dug too deep and too greedily and woke them up. They're not super thrilled. They've been buried there for like 300 years or something, and everyone kind of thought they were dead. Turns out, surprise. Everyone knows if you're in a video game world, you don't just lose something buried and assume it's dead. It's never going to be dead. Throughout these instances too, there will be little chests that can randomly spawn that are called, I think they're just called treasure chests. We had one just earlier before. Those basically let you kind of get some extra loot. The enemies in this game, in all of the whole game, not just in instances, do not actually drop any loot. There's no equipment drops or anything, so you have to rely entirely on quests, crafted goods, vendors. I mean, vendors sell all the crafted goods as well, so you can kind of use that to supplement it. It's not a big deal. But just be aware of that, so don't kind of expect to get drops and wonder why by level 10 you haven't gotten any drops from stuff. You do need to do quests to get early gear, or just buy it from the vendor. I'd suggest just doing quests. You got to do them anyway, and you generally are able to keep up. Don't make the mistake though of necessarily taking every gear that you can use. Reason being that you do want to have some gear for other classes if you do intend to level them. So grabbing some stuff for Disciples of War, which is all the more melee classes compared to the Disciples of Magic, which is of course the Thaumaturge and Conjurer Arcanist. There's one of those treasure coffers I mentioned. So it's definitely good to kind of keep a hand of that. You can store quite a bit of stuff here, so you can tell I've got, you know, this Disciple of War thing. I can't actually use it, but I picked it up because at some point I do plan to level up a Lancer and Warrior and all that kind of fun stuff. Never hurts to have that stuff on hand. And so here when this is looted, someone will just randomly get it. It automatically round robins. There's no way to change that to my knowledge. If loot actually does appear, which you'll see after the first boss, you'll get a little loot pop-up window here, and it prompts you to need or greed, or pass, of course. You can only need if it's something you can actually equip, and you can't even greed on it if you already have a copy of that item. So you can't just have someone ninjaing everything. If you've already had it, you cannot get it again. So it at least means that it's pretty fair, and you can't just get one guy winning everything if the same loot drops multiple times. So there's a lot of trash. One thing that is kind of neat about the dungeon system as well is that you have this little list of objectives here on the right side. With those objectives, it basically is letting you know what's kind of going on. So you have your current objective, the previous ones as well will show. Right now we still haven't completed the first objective, but you can tell roughly how far you have to go still in the dungeon. It's a pretty decent way of measuring roughly how long to go. It's not always the case, but there's usually a boss every step or two. Obviously the last step being the final boss, the previous ones being kind of mini bosses that are usually considerably easier. I mentioned in my last video that the game's not afraid to be hard. This is not a great instance to show that off, but there's another one that I didn't want to get you footage of because I've yet to be able to complete it. Everyone tends to wipe and then rage quit because there's an enemy that has an attack. It's a bee, and if you don't focus them down quick enough, they will start an attack called Final Sting where they kill themselves, which is great, but they also one-shot anyone that they hit. So you have a lot of instances of the tank dying. They're also immune to crowd control, so you have to prioritize your kills, which is a foreign concept to some MMO players out there. Learn quickly, people. It's only going to get worse at endgame, I'm sure. It's the kind of stuff that you learn, you can kind of figure out pretty quick what's causing it, but you might not understand exactly why. So first couple of pulls we were wondering why the tank kept dying until we noticed that the bees were dying at the same time. I also had noticed prior to that you couldn't CC them because I'm usually the one sleeping everything, so that kind of gave me an idea that they were probably supposed to be something specific. Now, each of these dungeons can be fairly lengthy. As you see, it's got a timer. It starts at, I believe it was max 90 when we first came in. They don't usually take that long, of course. That's kind of the max time you can take in the instance. Generally, from my experience, they're about 30 to 40 minutes long, depending on the instance. And I've thought ahead, and this is recording to my bigger hard drive, which is empty, so hopefully this will not run out part way and will be okay for the full recording. If it does drop at some point during the recording, I apologize extremely. I'm not going to re-catch up to that point to re-record. So if there's an impromptu ending, I'll put a comment, an annotation on the screen to let you know ahead of time so that you can kind of wrap it up and kind of get a general idea of what's going on. So visually this isn't the nicest instance. There's a couple of them that are nicer looking, but I wanted to show you this one because it's got some more interesting fights in it. There's one that's kind of like a haunted mansion kind of look. A couple are more outdoors, so you get kind of nicer scenery. This one's a lot of brown, of course, because we're underground in a cavern here. So you just saw we picked up some fire sand along the way, and now we're blowing open the gate. Hooray! So what's this little line here? That is the entryway to the boss. Once someone engages the boss, this shows you where the cutoff will be. The gate seals behind you, as you see in 15 seconds after engaging. So in just a little bit, that will close off, and no one else would be able to come in. So you can actually trap your party members outside. It's very important everyone be ready before you pull. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. And now it's sealed off, as you see. So this part here, we're mostly dealing with a lot of enemies, and eventually the boss will show up. So all these enemies are pretty squishy, as you see. Not really a big threat. They start throwing more and more at you to kind of ramp it up a bit. Looks like everyone that I'm playing with is pretty experienced at this point. We're a couple weeks after release, so people are kind of getting the hang of different things. Not many people I find have been repeating dungeons unless they're farming loot, because some of them have very cool loot sets. There's one in particular that looks really good for a black mage. It basically looks exactly like what you'd expect a black mage to be. Nice little bomb there. So this part of the fight, I haven't had to heal. If your tank is really good, you generally don't have to heal very much on the trash. Especially if you're using crowd control, of course, which is why I prefer to use it. It makes more sense. Everyone can kind of focus on what needs to get killed, including the healer. And the more people attacking it, obviously, the faster it goes. So be smart, use your CC if you can. Starting to get a little bit more packed of enemies here. Unfortunately, my spells cast a little bit too slow compared to a DPS, so I very rarely get my spells off in these kind of mass fights. That's also a problem I found during Fates, but that seems to mostly be because of my class more than any inherent system flaw in the system. Here's the boss, Kotos. So we're just going to kind of wail away on him. As you see, people are actually taking decent damage now from his hits, so I'm just going to keep him topped off. Now, as cross-class, I do have the ability Virus, which lets me lower the opponent's strength and dex by 15%. So I like to throw that on bosses as much as I can, just because it keeps things a little bit easier. Reduces the stress on the tank, and by result on me as well. And there you go, that's the first boss. That one is pretty straightforward. It's mostly just about all the waves of enemies. And here's our loot. So you click that, and you can kind of review it. In this case, it's a item for Gladiator, Marauder, Paladin, or Warrior, which I am not, so I can only greet it. There you go. I just won the item. There's a lot of victory fanfare, so if you're a fan of that music, you're gonna get your fill every time you level, win an item. Sometimes just completing certain things will also play it. So these instances usually are fairly interesting. Most of them kind of have a good variety of enemies. Bosses are fairly interesting. Some of them usually have a little extra mechanics, a little bit of exploration. As you can see the map here, we started up on top of here, and we've already made our way through all this, and now we're descending to the next floor. Another loot chest. This game does reward you to explore the areas each time, since every time you go through an area there can be different loot spawns. Pull that lever. Cat people so far seem to be the most popular. The Mycotes or Mycotes, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, but they used to be in Mithra. They seem to be by far the most popular class. Race, not class. So that's the end area here. So as you can see, we're already making decent progress. Often, once you get through a couple of objectives, it starts rolling through the other ones a lot quicker. Now, normally I'd be casting Stone Skin on all the DPS and myself, which absorbs, well, at my full level, it's 18% of the max target's HP. Target's max HP, sorry. That is extremely good on everyone, but it's not worthwhile to cast during combats because it tends to get knocked off pretty quick and it takes a little bit of time and mana to cast. It's much better to cast it when you're at full mana before a boss or between waves. I like to keep it up on DPS and myself, since DPS and healers generally shouldn't be taking a lot of damage to begin with, so it's nice to have that couple seconds of oh shit moment before you have to start spamming heals on them. Now, take the opportunity to go through some of my other skills here. So I already mentioned Cure and Cure 2, of course. I also have Medica, which restores the HP of myself and the party near me by 300 potency. Now, don't get potency confused with actual values. That's not how it works. It's essentially letting you know roughly how strong it is in terms of effectiveness. There's that AoE. So this actually heals for a decent amount. The issue that you have with it is that it's area based around you. So it only will heal people nearby to you. It won't grab all of the DPS or anything. There is Skull later on that does though. Next we've got Suna. Everyone that's played Final Fantasy probably recognizes Suna. That's the status removal. It only removes one at a time, and there's a special ability on it that there's a chance that the next Asuna will not cost anything. If you ever played at Marlboro and someone gets hit with bad breath, prepare to spam the hell out of that skill. Marlboro's, if you've never played a Final Fantasy, their ability nicknamed Bad Breath. It basically applies every status effect in the game to someone simultaneously, including paralysis, silence, not sleep in this case, but poison, slow, bind. Like it's just very bad. It basically makes you almost completely useless in combat, and it can actually almost one-shot you if you're not careful. We got some loot from the random chest, and it's more gladiator gear. I don't really mind though the loot from here is not going to be useful to my current class, so alt gear is always cool. Blasting device away. Now, if you've noticed this, I don't believe I mentioned this bar earlier on the previous video, but this bar essentially is showing you the main stats for each of the characters. It doesn't actually have any impact on you. but for example, my main stat's mind, so it lights up. We've got the tank as vitality, and the 2 archers are dex, of course. So this fight is kind of an interesting one. This is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to show this off a little bit. Here it summons you push down the plunger, summons a blasting cap. The boss is actually immune to damage. What you have to do is get the blasting cap to commit suicide. It will, there you go, so it's detonating. You just have to get the boss inside of that area of effect. Bam, takes damage. It consecutively splits down. They're telling me not to heal. So, yeah. Eventually Spriggans start spawning here as well, and that's pretty much what everyone else has to deal with. The tank kind of just worries about keeping this stuff going. So he's going to heal tank himself. And he basically doesn't want me to heal him because then I'll pull aggro. So our job is just to kill these guys, because these will attack the blasting caps, and they kill them pretty quickly. And that's going to do that. Stay near him to give him a chance to get the aggro. And there we go. Now I'm going to hold off on the heals while the blasting cap is spawned. So every time the blasting cap is respawned, one of those appears. And boom goes the dynamite. And now that's the end of the fight. We just clear this up and we're done. So it's kind of interesting. It requires a little bit more coordination and forethought than a lot of bosses in games do take. Ooh, Grimoire. I would actually really... I hope I win that for my Arcanist. I'm planning on leveling Arcanist for the purposes of unlocking Summoner and Scholar. Scholar being the other healing job. Would be very cool. And now we're entering an area that looks a little bit different. This is the more deep mines, so we've passed through the part that they've mined through, and now we're entering the lair of the Hecatoncheires. I'll just recast my Protect since the timer is at 8 minutes. Darn. Oh, nice. I got both. Cool, got myself a sweet Grimoire. So the pink means that it's a pretty good quality, so that'll be pretty nice. I'll probably last, usually they last quite a bit longer than other equal level items. Think of it as like the kind of blue from WoW. There's not really a magic equivalent, a basic kind of green. Everything that's not... Well, essentially everything is green, because no one ever wants plain gear with no stats. But you can, of course, get gear that gives you no useful stats, because you can put on crafting gear or gathering gear, which do actually use a separate set of stats. Can't see them on here currently because of my class, but you do actually have a stat for affecting how likely you are to succeed at gathering things, your critical chance for crafting, all that kind of stuff. So it gives you a pretty nice variety of stats and gear. It also means you can kind of customize a lot of different looks. A lot of the gear kind of repeats itself a little bit, and it's very linear in kind of how you upgrade your equipment. Almost everyone around the same level will probably be wearing the same thing. But you do have... There is a fair, decent number of looks to them. There's been a couple times I've had the same type of thing, but usually it's not really bothered me too much. So we're on our last step here, which is to defeat Gygus the Great, or Gyges, I don't really know. Without the voice acting, this game is very hard to tell what's what. So let's take a look at a couple more skills, shall we? Already went over the stones. Arrow is just a damage over time spell. Protect you saw. Raise, of course, is resurrection. You're probably wondering why I have Beckon on my bar. That's mostly because there's a lot of little quests where you have to kind of escort someone. and they move towards you when you beckon them, so I just felt it was easier to put that on my bar permanently rather than trying to swap it in and out all the time. Presence of Mind is the first skill you get as a white mage. It increases spell speed duration for 10 seconds, so it costs nothing. You can use it every 300 seconds, so every 5 minutes. It really doesn't seem to increase it that much. It's like fractions of a second, not really a huge benefit in my mind, but it's better than nothing and it doesn't cost anything. Got Limit Break, so if I wanted to be a jerk, I could use up the party's Limit Break right here, and it would heal everyone for a bunch, but I won't do that because I'm a good healer and I don't waste the party resources. Got my high potions, and I got my high ethers. Repose is my sleep spell. Regen, of course, that's the, you get that at 35 as a white mage. How is this better than what I have? Oh man, I feel really bad, I'm winning everything. This is unlike me, I normally lose all of my rolls. But I guess because I voluntarily gave up a bunch of gear to a black mage for that sweet black mage set, maybe the game's taking some pity on me. After that, you've got Cleric Stance on my bar. Cleric Stance is kind of a cool ability. It makes sure that as a healer, I am not completely unable to solo. Gotta make sure I'm healing here, because I don't want to die. What it does is it swaps my int and my mind, mind being the heal stat, int being the DPS spell stat. Not only does it do that, but it increases my potency of attack spells by 10% and reduces the potency of my healing spells by 20. So basically, it puts me slightly below a DPS class, so you can't actually do proper DPS with it, and you really don't have the spells for it anyway. But it lets you do enough damage that you don't really have much of an issue. The slow cast time is the main hindrance that you have. And it's also a little bit more mana intensive to spam damage spells, but they work out pretty nicely. And you just have to make sure that you do not have this on when you are trying to heal people, because you will heal like a not healer person. It's a toggle ability, so I can just swap this on right here. Better swap it off real quick. Oh my god, cast my spell. I'm doing what I just said not to do. He took a lot more damage than I was expecting right there, since he was at full HP, so my bad for screwing around right there. And we got Sprint. Sprint, of course, being Sprint, lets you kind of run faster. Until you get your own Chocobo, that is your main method of getting around quickly. You actually move the same speed as a Chocobo while sprinting, so it's not too bad. The main reason you want to use the Chocobo instead is that Sprint has a cooldown between uses. It lasts for certain amount. For some reason it's by TP divided by a number. Everyone only has 1,000, so I don't really get the point. But however long it lasts, you have about the same amount of time before it is ready to use again. I'm just going to pass on that. I want to take all the loot. Yeah, so on the side I've got my unicorn mount, which is cool. All the mounts seem to play different music. I've got some food, because food gives you extra XP and some stats. Dye, so I can use that to change the dye on my gear. It's a shame that there's no voice acting for a lot of these things, but you can kind of get the general idea. And say hello to the boss. Ooh, they started the fight while I was still watching the video. Apparently they're in a rush. Normally it's a generally good idea to make sure everyone's done watching the video before you start actually doing things, but hey. Alright, so this fight. It's a little bit of an interesting one. So this is the other fight that I wanted to make sure to show you guys. This requires a lot of coordination and good group effort. So this boss, as you can probably tell, really not all that hard. He's pretty straightforward, we're just kind of spanking him away here, but now he's running off on his own. So he is going to go break this boulder here. Attack that for a little while. Once it's broken, which it happens pretty quick, enemies will continuously spawn from this wall they will go across to that other boulder over there, and they will break it. If that happens, 2 sets of enemies will constantly spawn, and they will both just start attacking us. So DPS needs to kill those stone servants as fast as possible. You do not want that wall to break. Main reason being that while this guy is just beating on the wall, you can still kind of ignore him largely. As a general rule, pay attention to those warnings that an enemy approaches that let you know when the next guy is about to appear. And if you're DPS, watch your limit breaks. If you have both bars filled, always wait for both bars on final boss. It's only possible on the final boss to use a 2-powered limit break. It will do a crazy amount of damage. So we pretty much have this in hand. The last groups that I've done this with were a lot less coordinated than these guys, so I don't think we're going to have much of a problem. And just kind of keep working away, whittling away on it. Now, I tried to be clever the first time and use my fluid aura to knock back these guys to keep them away from the wall as long as possible. Don't do it. Fluid aura doesn't cast as fast as you think it does. It generally just pushed them towards the wall instead and made me feel like an idiot. So, not great. Now, as a Conjurer / White Mage, Arrow is a very useless spell. Don't use it for DPS. It is not good. What just happened? I think the tank used the limit break. Heal. So yes, Arrow does potency 50 damage hit instantly, and then 25 per tick for 18 seconds. Compare that to Stone, which is 140 instantly for only slightly more mana. It's really not worth it to cast the Arrow generally. It's good for tagging enemies to get in a quick little bit of damage on them, but on the whole you want to generally use Stone instead. As a healer, it's nice to have Arrow because you can use that to quickly get in some damage between heals. And there we go. Dungeon complete. Hooray! So you get your final loot, which I don't really care about. And then you have your little exit portal. Once you click that, you get teleported out right away. Sometimes you get a cutscene depending on the instance. But there you go. That's our look at dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. Until next time, Wormeck out.